Hey guys, welcome to TGS. Today we're going to be talking about coronavirus and the effects it's having on conservation and the environment. I know this probably isn't on the forefront of many people's minds, but for those of us who love wildlife and love conservation, it is a factor that we should all just be aware of. And since we're all stuck at home, let's keep our fingers on the pulse of everything because we've got the time. The first thing we need to talk about is kind of what led us to the position we're in today, and I don't want to talk about that too much because it's still quite sensitive. That being the fact that humans are encroaching on the natural world massively, and the two have never been more intertwined en masse. Deforestation is linked to 31% of disease outbreaks, and this is potentially linked to what we're currently suffering. We need food. Humans like to eat, and as such, intensification of agriculture and deforestation for agriculture in countries that aren't England, for example, where we did that a long time ago, they're happening. They really are happening. That pushes people out closer and closer and closer into proximity with animals. It also economically changes a country. So, whereby once upon a time then people might have lived a little bit more harmoniously with an environment, suddenly there's a need to factory farm, we'll come and touch on that in a minute, and intensify the agricultural landscape. That surprisingly requires slightly less people and slightly less jobs, and as such there's people out there who are on the fringes of this society who will be working towards making their money in other ways. And this kind of links back to wet markets and exotic foods and the trafficking of animals. So these are all slightly important factors as to how COVID broke out, potentially, and this is the best theory that goes so far, is that it went from something like a bat to potentially something like a pangolin, and that's kind of what is being bandied around as one of the most popular theories at the moment. The thing is that the trafficking of pangolins has been going on for many, many years. However, as a country grows, the economy grows and the population grows, the desire for this product is growing. The trafficking is getting more intense, and as such, and more importantly, the routes that they can traffic are getting smaller because there's less and less agricultural land or wild land that they can take these things through. The proximity to animals is getting closer because there's less forest and more people, and it's just this huge route of driving factors that perhaps have brought us to where we're here to today. It all boils down to corporate and personal greed on this note, is that humans are inherently greedy, and that boils up into a large picture of corporations. We like to eat the best, and we like to do all this, and we like to live the best we can, and as such we are slowly destroying this planet, which is kind of sad, but we're all aware of it, and nobody's really doing anything about it, which is amazing that we've all managed to change our lifestyle so radically for this, which we'll get into in a little bit as well. Before I move on, it's worth mentioning that factory farming plays a huge part, not in this, but in many other things. Something like avian influenza, for example, spreads a lot easier with factory farming. These large, intense places with thousands and thousands of animals with very, very, very similar genetic coding, a disease can spread very, very quickly. It can also hop from place to place a lot easier because there's a less variety in genetics, and, well, when all the animals are stacked up like this, it's a bit strange, isn't it? But it's pretty unpleasant. I think every hunter here will agree with that, and most people will agree that factory farming is not particularly pleasant, and there is a way that farming can be done, which is done in this country at least, very, very well for the benefit of the animal's life. Anyway, that's unimportant because it does happen in other countries, and what we have here may be one thing, but what they have in other places is another. Did you know, for example, that the UK imports something like 6,000 tonnes of poultry from China a year? 6,000 tonnes. So it doesn't really matter how we do it here, because actually we do still import products from other countries that have slightly less rigorous rules than us. And slightly less, I don't know, it's worth bearing in mind that we are not this isolated place, and the world is such a global place that these things spread faster and harder than they ever have. What would have just once affected a tribe that came into contact with a bat, that had come in contact with a pangolin, that had come into contact with a person, is now sort of affecting an entire world. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but this is the problem with pandemics now, is it's not just a country that suffers, it is a globe that suffers. And as such, as a globe, we should be looking for solutions to this problem, but we are already so far down a road that perhaps, I don't know, this is not a political show, so let's move on. Environmentally, positives. Travel is down. Emissions are as low as they've been in many, many years. China's emissions output is down 25%, New York's 50%, UK's is well down. Because we're not driving, industry is down, a lot of factories, non-essential businesses are shut. Plane travel is down massively. 67 million less passengers on planes in the first quarter of this year. That's a huge reduction in air traffic. And air traffic is a huge contributor. I mean, I think it might just be cows. Actually, no, it's just cows that are causing global warming. Sorry, that's incorrect. No, but if you look long term, actually, it's going to be very interesting to see what the effects are after this. Will habits change? We've had to change so much in a very short period of time, being that working from home or speaking to people from home or having conference calls instead of traveling thousands of miles to talk to people. And we are all slightly surviving, which is interesting. Will we pick up where we left off, or will we see this as a point of change? More importantly, will us who do it for pleasure as opposed to for commercial gain go and make up for the holidays that we have lost? Who knows? I mean, you're not going to lose the commuter miles you will lose, but will the pleasure miles come back and make up? Will we go and have a big boom and sort of bring those emissions back into the world? Does it really matter? Who knows? Unfortunately, with the lack of emissions that are going out into the world and the lack of fossil fuels, there's also been a huge drop in the economy and financial side of things. And when an economy is low and there's not a huge amount of money around, it's usually the environment that suffers and the animals that will suffer. Amongst other things, of course, but they certainly take a bit of a backseat by comparison to other things. We reprioritise. Before I move on, let's just quickly talk about waste. Both recreational and commercial waste are down. However, domestic waste and medical waste are way up. So I don't know how that will balance out. But again, if we can reduce the amount of waste that we produce in this world, that's not a bad thing either. Using less plastic is really a good thing. Again, anything that reconnects us with our slightly more natural side and gives people a greater appreciation of the environment, wildlife, and how we can interact with that, I do view as a good thing. Anyway, let's move on quickly. Talking about the environmental damage that a low economy can bring, the first thing we're going to talk about is charitable giving. Forecast over the next 12 weeks, £3.7 billion will be lost from that sector. £3.7 billion. And that sector obviously involves a lot of animals. In fact, there's one RSPCA sanctuary site place that is down 90% in takings already during this shutdown. And that will obviously go on to affect the lives of the animals that live there. It's pretty bad, isn't it? But that doesn't just go for them, that is going to be across the board for all animal charities. So it's worth bearing in mind that anything that is charity run at the moment that you support, you should probably lend your support to, if you can, and ask them to put themselves out. But obviously, also at this time, it's worth prioritising food banks and shelters for humans, because there's going to be a lot of human suffering out there. And is it right to prioritise human suffering over animal suffering? Yeah, I think probably it is. Although I'd love your thoughts on that as well. It's not just charities though. Natural England has halted all field work and got everyone to work from home. Unfortunately, a lot of hands-on wildlife management and conservation can't be done from a desk at a computer, even though government probably think that is the case. It has to be the field work that really leads and drives the success of any of these campaigns, be it save the badger or save the hummingbird. It doesn't matter. It's the people on the ground that actually make the difference. The guys in the office rarely do. Although a lot of charities will have that probably dismayed, which is where shooting steps in, at least to this argument, is that farmers and gamekeepers are still out doing their jobs. They don't really have a choice. If they have stock on the ground, they need to go and look after it. And gamekeepers still need to go and look after the birds. Be that the guys up on the heather looking after and preparing the ground for the successful wild broods to come off, or the guys down south preparing the environments, the hedgerows, the woodlands for the pheasants to come in, and actually holding their birds in fields to make sure that they lay and look after. They still have to go to work and look after their stock. And it's something that a lot of people won't at least appreciate, is how much environmental benefit is done by shooting. And more importantly, this hasn't ceased. Charitable work has, government work has, but private enterprises in the countryside still go on. So actually, look who's working hardest for conservation, as always, as we all kind of knew anyway. So saying that domestically, even the estates that aren't shooting for commercial reasons this year, in that they are not wanting to risk the outlay of buying birds if they can't get the stuff to look after them, more importantly if they haven't got the money to run the shoot, are still keeping their keepers on, so their conservation work will still happen regardless of whether they're getting income or not. And that is a sign to me that the people truly care about the countryside, shooting people at least. Some of these charities don't, and I'm not one for saying that they should be risking the spread of this disease at all. However, the beauty of a gamekeeper is he is an on-site conservationist. He lives on the estate, he's not risking anything by going and doing his job. As long as he's being sensible about how he does it, not putting himself at risk to extra burden the NHS at this really miserable time. Anyway, moving on to Africa. Africa is an interesting one as well. There's a lot of hunter conservation that goes on in Africa. And that's going to be a difficult one, isn't it? Where flights are banned, they're going to have a pretty tough year, at least a very tough short period of time. The beauty about a commercial outfit is that they will usually have money in the bank and people will be booking for the future. What will the future look like? Nobody knows. But I have no doubt that those guys will still be doubling down on their conservation of certain species so that in the future they still have that. As we all know, the saying in Africa goes, if it pays, it stays. So if these guys have value in these animals and that value is ongoing, then great. It's just about hopefully them tiding this over. What does worry me is the fact that there are some charitable run conservation out there, and if they take a big hit and those projects fall apart, then that actually could spell disaster for wildlife. Whereas a hunting concession that does its huge amount of conservation effort will get their money eventually. It doesn't matter, the animals will last until next year and they will get shot to bring in that funding regardless. If they don't get their charitable funding for these other projects, if they shut down, that could spell disaster. Something else that might be interesting is that actually there's a risk that gorillas could be getting coronavirus if people come into contact with them who have it. So there could be a bit of a halt there for that sort of conservation, tourism, photographic type of thing. But I don't know how it'll affect that, but time will tell, and that will be interesting to keep our eyes on. So to conclude, has it been good for the environment? Well, probably in this very short term, yes, our emissions are down, and hopefully in the long term, people will take this as a lesson that you can work from home. You don't necessarily have to go to work, and a lot of people, maybe, hopefully something good will come of all of this disaster and horror. For the environment, if nothing else. We've all learnt that we can entertain ourselves at home. We've all learnt that our families are actually alright, even if we don't see them that much on a regular week. Actually, we can hang around them, and we are learning to be better, more social people. People out there are wonderful. I mean, I've been for my daily walk the same as many of you, and I've never had such conversations as I've had from 2 meters away, because actually we can all be emotionally close and socially distant because we're all going through this together. And it's on that note that I kind of want to say something, but I don't really know what I want to say. People have never been outside so much. Those who walk usually will know that when you walk, you don't usually see that many people. And now it's like a bloody motorway out there. Everybody is going out and experiencing that little bit of countryside that they perhaps never would have before. And engagement with local environments has never really been higher, or at least not as long as I can remember. And that is interesting, and that is something that perhaps we should put our heads together to get people who are doing this now to do it ongoing, to understand and appreciate where they're walking and what they're seeing and what they can do to be a part of that in the longer term. And like I said, I don't really know what that looks like, but I'd love your thoughts on that, really, because that is a fascinating thing to me, if nothing else, that this is a time where people are connecting with the outdoors more than they ever have. Obviously it helps that it's beautiful weather outside and that nobody's at work, but it's creating long-term change from this short-term upset of the world is something that we should all be looking for, coming out of the other end of this and not going, oh well, we just sat at home for 3 weeks and did nothing. 3 weeks is optimistic, but you get what I mean. More than anything, it's also a time to be hugely proud of what we do as a shooting community. We fund gamekeepers. Gamekeepers are conservationists. They're daily conservationists. And they are still out there doing their hugely important work, whereas every charitable driven one can't. And that is a great thing. And as I've said, I don't want them to go and risk themselves for doing it. But the model of having an on-site conservationist on an estate, or 2 or 3, that's great. That's so good. That's an amazing, amazing concept. And I know that it kind of seems stupid until you're in a position like this, when actually the only conservation work out there being done now is by the shooting community, pretty much. Guys, thank you very much for watching. Take care. I'd love to know your thoughts on what we could do to get all these people who are out walking more engaged with the environment that they are walking in. Please stay safe, stay at home, and if there's anything we can do to make your lives any better, please let us know and we'll try our best. Thank you very much for watching, guys. Take care. Goodbye. And always be excellent to one another, because we definitely need it right now.